This is The Weekly Set, the official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com. Episode 158, recorded May 30th and 31st, 2018. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Weekly Set, the official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com. I am your host. My name is Tyson, and joining me today, as always, is Will Rohrig.
Hello.
So, today and tomorrow, from the time we're recording this, we're doing it in two different segments, but we're going to be recording a summer preview where we're going to go over some of our picks for the more interesting summer shows that are coming up. Mostly new shows, but we'll address some returning shows a little bit as well. And then we're going to go over and do our regular show discussion. But let's jump into our first topic, which is the summer preview. So I put up an article on thetotalscreen.com. You can check that out. Or the totalscreen.blogspot.com, I guess. Since our domain, we're still having some issues with that. So you can find it that way as well. And in that, you can see a lot of YouTube trailers and information about the shows coming up in the next 3 months. So June, July, and August. And we decided we were going to kind of pick out our top 6. Each of us picked 3 in that period, new shows. But we'll also talk first about some of the returning shows. So this is all kind of like an order of release with the returning shows first. FLCL Progressive. This is Cooley Progressive. It's a new season of FLCL, which is crazy.
Yes. Yes, it is. It's crazy and awesome. And I love Adult Swim for funding this and making this a reality. It's not going to be one new season. It's going to be 2 new seasons.
Yes, they're doing Progressive is the first one, but there's another one after that as well. And they already aired the first episode of that one.
Yeah, for April Fools. Just to kind of like tease you to whet your appetite, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. It tells you like how far along they are, that they already showed an episode of the second series.
Yeah, they already got the first season in the bag, unless they're doing things backwards, but yeah.
They're just doing them in a random order. They're doing like the Fibonacci ones.
Yeah.
FLCL Progressive, that's going to be really exciting. I have to note my one concern, and I was just mentioning this to Will, is that I'm a sub fan. Will's a dub fan, but I'm a sub fan. I want to watch it subtitled. I don't know if there's a way to watch it subtitled.
I can go either way, to be honest, but yeah.
I don't know if there's a way to watch it subbed, and that's a little disheartening for me, so.
Yeah, it's kind of odd that they wouldn't provide that option, like.
Maybe they did, we just don't know about it.
I get why it would be dubbed on TV, because probably the majority of their audience probably, wants to hear it with English actors. But yeah, it'd be straight if they don't provide like a sub version, like they could just put it up on their website with a subbed option, like.
I'm hoping that's what ends up happening. I think that's the most likely chance we have of getting a subtitled version of the show. And if that's the case, then that's how I'm going to watch it. If not, I might just wait. And then, if it eventually comes to Netflix or something else, I'm sure they're going to have the language options, because they always do for like anime and stuff there. And the series is, it's being made in Japanese. So the subs, will exist in some form at some time. It's just a question of if I'm going to be able to watch it right away or if I'm going to have to wait. So I just don't watch the dub.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Like, you want to be able to enjoy it with the original Japanese voice track. Yeah. Totally get it.
But that's FLCL. That's coming out really soon. That's this
I'm
weekend.
Super excited. FLCL, the original, is one of my top favorite animes of all time. Even though, like, short, there's 6 episodes? The original. It was just magical.
It's like a lightning-paced, surreal.
I just, there's nothing to adequately describe it, really, because it's funny,
it's hyper, but it's also got a lot of heart to it.
It's surreal, very surrealist. It's not similar to like anything else I've watched, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's got great soundtrack by the Pillows.
It's got great the Pillows. Oh my god, I fell in love with that soundtrack.
They're doing a tour. They're sponsoring a tour for the Pillows.
Yeah, Adult Swim is sponsoring a Pillars tour. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, so it's just lots of cool stuff related around that. Later on, we have Humans coming back for another season. Humans is something I recommend to people that can't get enough of Westworld.
I saw it. I'm like, oh, it's Dollar Store Westworld, I guess.
Well, it's a British adaptation of a Swedish series, and it's kind of the same. It's like a less violent Westworld. It's not about the super rich mistreating robots in a Western setting. It's about robots that are popularized as like servants, and people use them for everything from sex to as like maids and stuff, or, you know, babysitters for the kids. And
so basically what would be more realistic than opening the world's most expensive theme park would be just using robots as basically slaves, right?
And then in the same way, there's like the idea of like an awakening in a sense. It happens a little differently in this one, like the guy who, well, I won't spoil any for people who want to watch it. But yeah, it's just kind of a different take. It's a really good show as well. If Westworld is already covering your entire appetite for that kind of stuff, then, you know, I'd say stick with Westworld over Humans.
I'd say if you can't wait, you know, for between episodes of Westworld, then that's a good thing to fill your appetite while you're waiting for the next between episodes.
Yeah, I think it's a more human story. It's more grounded. It's more down to like personal dynamics between characters than Westworld is. So if you're into that and you're not into the kind of like the more crazy puzzle adventure aspect that is Westworld, then Humans will probably be more your cup of tea. But yeah, I mean, it's similar. It's got a lot of similar themes going on. Next up on the returning side, Claws is coming back for its second season. Claws is really good. If you like, you know, Orange is the New Black or Glow, it's very along those lines. It's a very female empowered.
I like one of those shows.
It's a very female empowered thing. And it's about like, these women, they work at a nail salon and they're involved in organized crime, and they're kind of like caught up in it. They're not leading it. They're like just caught up in it. And it's just kind of about them. And it just kind of has that quirky sensibility that you get from like, you know, a Genji Kohan show, like Orange is the New Black or Glow. This isn't from Genji Kohan, but it has a similar feel to it.
Right. Okay. So it's similar in tone and stuff to those shows.
Yes, definitely. Like, I think it's a very fun show. I quite enjoy it. Hank from Breaking Bad's in it too, so that's fun. Next up we have Luke Cage. So yeah, Luke Cage season 2.
What needs to be said about Luke Cage season 2, you know?
Hopefully it doesn't fall apart in the last act.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't fall apart in the last act. Yep. Definitely. I saw the trailer. Apparently there is some powerful guy who can actually hurt Luke Cage. He's like that powerful.
Hey, and you know the biggest news of all? Iron Fist is in this season.
What? My favorite character.
It's the exact moment when the season falls apart. They bring in Iron Fist and it's just like viewership just drops off immediately.
Yeah, that's when the season's going to drop off, right? When Iron Fist gets involved.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting because, I mean, Iron Fist and Luke Cage are a huge thing in the comics, the two of them together, Heroes for Hire. So hopefully they play into that, and on Luke Cage's turf, you know, with his show, his showrunner, that, you know, the writing staff for that show hopefully will work better with Iron Fist. I mean, hopefully the character itself, or even the actor, it was the showrunner.
He has no charisma. Like, the character has like zero, even in like the Defenders.
Yeah.
He was just boring as shit.
I still, even with the Defenders, though, I blame that on the showrunner for Iron Fist.
Yeah.
Buck, and I blame it on him.
Buck, yeah.
They didn't have much to work with in the Defenders with him, just because he'd been so poorly set up.
He'd been so poorly set up in his own series. So hopefully they work with him in Iron Fist, or not. Hopefully they work with him in Luke Cage, and they give him a bit more charisma, make him a more interesting character, because he is like bland. He is like, you know, sunshine bread, you know? It's like...
yeah, pretty much. So hopefully we can see kind of a little bit of a redemption for his character, and hopefully a redemption from season 1 of Luke Cage, which, like we said, fell apart in the later
fell
half
apart
of the season.
second. Although, judging by trailer, it doesn't look like it, as they're going so out there conceptually with this idea of the super powerful guy. But I hope they go back to like the idea of like a more grounded villain. Like Cottonmouth was like grounded. I liked him because he wasn't over the top. He was grounded. You like understood him as a character. You understood his motivations. And then when Diamondback Man, he was just like a cartoon character. You know, he had like, you know, his motivations and stuff were like, you know, out of a comic book. And I think that really jarred because like they put those back to back and you can really see the dichotomy like crystal clear. And I think that's what really put people off the second half.
Yeah, definitely. Cottonmouth was underserved.
Yeah.
At the point where they transitioned away from him was the strongest part in his story. And then he was just gone.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was hopefully it doesn't make the same mistake with the second season. I just really wish, I think what really really needs to be done is they need to have shorter seasons for these shows. Because every single one of these shows drags.
Yeah, you say, well, 13 episodes is pretty short, but yeah, no, it turns out like they don't really have 13 episodes of content.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, for most of these shows, I think 6 episodes would do it.
Yeah, I think so, because
really tight 6-episode seasons.
They seem to fall apart after the 6th episode.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Like,
they need that tighter run.
Yeah, I think, like, right now they could probably cut down to, like, 10 episodes and still make it work. You know, I mean, lot.
Defenders was 8 episodes and that still suffered.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of premium shows now are, like, around 10 episodes. Like, you know, Legion was 10 episodes. They did extend it to 11 for the season, but
the first season of Legion was 8, I think.
Oh, okay.
And then
I think Westworld is going to be 10 episodes.
Westworld's 10. Game of Thrones was historically 10. The later seasons are shorter.
Yeah, so there's no they can cut a few episodes. I mean, I watched all these Marvel shows like on Netflix. I know they can cut 3 episodes and still.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It's not even a matter of they can cut them and still get the point across. It's that they can cut them and get the point across better.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that, you know, eventually they kind of go in that direction, but it doesn't look too much like it. Defenders was 8 episodes. That still drags somehow. I don't think that the other shows are going to cut. They're still being clocking in at 13, I think. So, but speaking of comic book shows, the next one coming up is Preacher. So you don't watch Preacher, but I'm excited for it. This is just a teaser, but it shows in the teaser just how fucking ridiculous.
I totally forgot that was a show, but like anything on AMC, I'm kind of like, it's kind of outside like my view because they don't put that stuff up on Hulu. They don't put that stuff up on Netflix.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But Preacher has been really good. It's really got that balance between like that kind of cool genre, like comic book adventure kind of thing, but also just like absurdist comedy.
I did I did watch like the first 2 episodes. I did like it. I definitely would. I would watch more if it was like more readily accessible, like via internet. And I think my best bet is to go to AMC's website, but I don't even know if
they're not going to have that old episode. So I don't know. I mean, I'd have to look that up. Maybe they're on Amazon or something.
Maybe.
Where the episodes are, their backlog.
It's
gotta be on something.
3rd season. So, you know, that's longer than I thought it would.
Yeah, definitely. And it's going to some interesting places and it's getting weirder and weirder, which is that's what makes the show work. So
that's what makes the show work. Exactly.
Next up, I'd already mentioned Glow. Well, Glow is coming back as well. So I'm going to have Claws and Glow on around the same time. So that's going to be fun.
Yep. Glow's coming back. Glow was one of my favorite new shows on Netflix last year.
Beautifully paced show. That show flies by.
Yeah, that is, when you're talking about pacing, that is a show that had that tight pacing that we were talking about, you know.
Glow's a show that's hard to stop watching.
It is hard to stop watching, exactly. And it was perfectly paced because, like, the last episode was where they finally had their first televised fighting match, you know, which the whole season was leading up to. And so you really got that sense of satisfaction going out of it. I don't think, like, a second of that show was wasted.
Oh, yeah. It was really good from beginning to end.
So,
such good pace. It's like a masterclass in like good pacing.
Definitely. Like, Marvel can learn some lessons from that.
Next up is Trial and Error. Now this show...
Not sure what that show is.
So Trial and Error is a really funny... It's a complete story, the first season. So they're kind of doing an anthology-like thing.
I remember what this... Okay, I just Googled it. I remember what this is. That's a John Lithgow comedy.
Yeah, it's really funny. It has a lot in common with like a Parks and Recreation. Like I honestly, like, it feels like if you like Parks and Recreation, like kind of like the absurdity of the town that it takes place in and stuff, Trial and Error feels like it could be like a neighbor town. Like they could have an episode of Parks and Rec where Leslie goes to this town.
Yeah, I'm definitely down for checking this out. Like, I remember when I saw the trailer, but for first I thought this looks funny. I'm going to check it out. Then I totally forgot it existed.
It is a very funny show. The first episode, or the first season, is all about John Lithgow and his trial. The second season is a new trial. I don't know, like, it hasn't really, there isn't a lot of information about this show out there, but I think
it is.
I think it's the same rest of the cast.
I think that's why I forgot it existed, because like nobody talked about it.
It's unfortunate, but it didn't get a lot of attention. But I think it's going to be the same cast for the second season. But it's just that instead of John Lithgow, it's a different person who's on trial. This time it's Kristen Chenoweth from American Gods and Pushing Daisies, and she played Easter in American Gods.
Yes, I remember.
So Kristen Chenoweth, the season's called Lady Killer, and it's about her trial. So that'll be fun to watch. It was really hilarious the first season. I'm hoping it's the same characters besides John Lithgow's character, because I really enjoyed those characters. But if not, we're gonna probably get introduced to a whole another slew of interesting characters.
Would be interesting.
And then last up for the returning shows I put down is Swedish Dicks. This is a Swedish import show about two Swedish private detectives in Los Angeles. Of course, the reason to watch the show is that Peter Stormare plays one of the Swedish Dicks.
Oh, nice.
And in the first season, the overarching story had to do with his old friend, a stuntman who had died. It's a cameo by Keanu Reeves.
Oh, nice.
And he was in a few episodes of the series, like exploring kind of like the backstory of him and like where they were both stuntmen and stuff. So that was like a surprisingly good show. And yeah, I'm looking forward to watching it again. It's really funny. That's it for the returning shows this summer. Now we're going to go on to the shows that we each picked. Now I'm doing these in order chronologically of when they're coming out, but oddly enough, it equaled out that like the 3 shows I picked are first and then the 3 shows you picked follow. It just kind of happened that way.
Bias? No.
It's all chronological release. It just happened that way, weirdly enough. But first up is Impulse. This is coming to YouTube Premium or YouTube Red. It used to be YouTube Red. You know, they're rebranding again. But it's coming out on Wednesday, June 6th. And it's based on the book Impulse by Stephen Gould. What's really interesting here is that this is produced by Doug Liman, who is perhaps best known for being the guy that was really pushing that movie Jumper.
Isn't this like set in that universe?
I don't think it's set in that universe, but it's basically the same idea. It's the idea of somebody who has the ability to teleport.
Okay.
And so it's basically like the same idea as Jumper. Less, it's not a movie. It's more personal, the story. It's kind of about how this girl's dealing with discovering this ability, because it activates basically because she's about to be raped. And when she teleports, it doesn't just teleport her, like it kind of sucks in the environment around her, like crumples it. And so the guy that like is almost raping her, who's like this kind of hot shot at her school, basically gets like paralyzed. He gets like all messed up because of her teleport. And so it's kind of more of like a personal story about her dealing with that and about suspicion, about what happened to this guy and why he was hurt. And it's kind of focusing more on that, whereas Jumper was kind of like all about some secret organization hunting them down or something.
Yeah, true.
This is more like a personal story. Similar thing. It's based on a book, so it's unrelated to the original Jumper. It just seems like the producer has a really narrow view of what he wants to make. He just really wants to make.
Give me stories about people who can teleport.
Yeah. What's interesting here is that
he's like, I want to do a Nightcrawler movie for.
Yeah, basically, yeah. The showrunner is Lauren LaFranc. There, she is a writer on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so there's some pedigree to respect there. As I mentioned, the producer, it's the guy who produced Jumper, another guy who was involved in the OC, but they kind of seem to be less on the creative side. The more important thing is Lauren LaFranc, who was a writer on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., who should be running the series. Also, somewhat interesting is that the pilot script, so it's been changed since then, is written by the same guy who wrote the pilot script for Lost, before J.J. Abrams and Damon Lindelof were brought in.
Oh, okay.
So like he wrote this like story about a plane crash and about survival on an island that had none of the kind of like weird supernatural elements.
Well, that doesn't sound interesting. It's written by the guy who made the boring version of Lost. Okay.
Well, we have no idea. I mean, it could have been a really compelling drama.
It could have been a really compelling drama. Yeah, that's true.
But Jeffrey Leiber is his name. And so he wrote the pilot script for this as well. But that's probably also been heavily changed since then. That's just kind of like the way the business works. But so that's Impulse, and that's on Wednesday, June 6th. Next up is A Very English Scandal, which comes to Amazon on Friday, June 29th. This is written by Russell T. Davies, he's the guy that rebooted Doctor Who. So they've had a few different showrunners on the kind of the modern iterations of Doctor Who, but the guy who like really brought it back was Russell T. Davies. And before Doctor Who, he was mostly known as he was the guy that did Queer as Folk.
Okay.
Which was a kind of a groundbreaking show about gay people that first came to the UK, and then there was like a US version of the show as well.
Right.
The whole series is directed by Stephen Frears, who did Dangerous Liaisons, the movie. The biggest name attached to this, though, is Hugh Grant from About a Boy, Four Weddings and a Funeral, that, and Ben Whishaw from Cloud Atlas, and he plays Q in the recent Bond movies. So it's the two of them, and it's kind of, this is based on a true story that happened in the 1970s of the head of the Liberal Party in the UK, member of a parliament, Jeremy Thorpe, and he had this scandal where he was accused of trying to kill this boy that had come forward and said that he was Jeremy Thorpe's lover, and that Jeremy Thorpe was trying to kill him. And so this is kind of like a comedic telling of this story. Like you can tell there's a lot of comedy to it. So it's a really
that sounds like a super comedy premise right there, like a laugh riot.
It actually looks really funny. It's British, so it's got that kind of dry British humor to it.
Right.
It's
only the British can turn something about like a politician attempting to murder a young boy into a comedy.
I should say young man.
Young man. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
He wasn't accused of being a pedophile. This was like an adult.
I'm just imagining Home Alone now with like politics and like Marv was a pedophile.
No. This is all just about like this guy has a bad breakup with, this is a closeted relationship too.
Right.
He wasn't known to be gay. He's starting to come forward because he feels jilted, and then they think that the best way to cover it up is to kill him.
Oh my God.
So they're like trying to kill him, but they're just doing a really bad job of it. And it's just kind of like a comedy about that. So I think it looks really funny. I like Hugh Grant and I like Russell T Davies. So I think it looks pretty funny. I'm excited about that. But of the 3 shows I picked, the one I'm most excited about is the next one, which is Bobcat Goldthwait's Misfits and Monsters.
Oh my God.
You probably know Bobcat Goldthwait from his comedy, his stand-up comedy, or from Police Academy, right?
Oh, I know him from both those things. I know him from like films that he directed.
That's what makes this interesting to me. His films have been really good.
I can't remember the names, but like the guy who was like sick of everything.
That's God Bless America.
Yes.
That's the one where he goes on like a murder rampage.
Yeah.
Because he's sick of like reality TV and just like the rudeness of society and stuff.
Right. Bobcat Goldthwait has like a very specific, twisted sense of humor.
Yeah, it's very black. It's a very black humor. He did God Bless America, which is one you're mentioning. He also did Father of the Year, which is the one that Robin Williams was in.
Yes, I saw that one too.
Which is a very dark comedy as well.
Yes.
But this is an anthology series, so every episode is like a self-contained story in the same like vein as like a Black Mirror. But it's just kind of like an absurdist comedy with elements of fantasy and horror.
This is going to be a very Black Mirror.
Yeah. I don't know, just from watching the clip we have up on there, which is basically kind of not really a trailer because it's like showing, Bobcat talking about the show and stuff like that too. It's like a preview. I think it looks hilarious.
That's got Seth Green is going to be in it. Always nice to see Seth Green.
He's going to be in one of the episodes where he's the voice of like this cartoon bear, and then he starts seeing the cartoon bear, and it's like kind of, it's malicious.
Oh, that's going to be great.
I think the mermaid episode looks really funny that they showed in the trailer, where this guy sees a mermaid and then she is trying to initiate a relationship with him, and then her ex is Poseidon, and he's all like, it's just so ridiculous. I'm really looking forward to this. This is coming to True TV, so it might be a little bit harder to find. I think the True TV stuff almost always goes to Netflix though, eventually.
Probably.
So if you don't have True TV, it should be available later through Netflix or something. But I've caught a few things on True TV, and I'm definitely looking forward to this.
Yes.
And now we move on to your shows, which I should note, I let you pick first so that I could round out the rest of them. A lot of these probably would have been my picks.
Okay, yeah, these were the most, besides Bobcat Goldthwait's show, which almost made it into my picks. These were probably say most excited about from what I was looking at. I would say Castle Rock, definitely. I mean, it's Stephen King. It's based on his works, and it's and the most exciting thing about it is it's an anthology, and it's all going to be connected because the Stephen King universe is connected. Like anybody who's read The Dark Tower knows that. And so
they're using characters from the books. Like there's the guy who played Stick in Daredevil. He's playing the sheriff that was like in like 2 or 3 of Stephen King's novels.
Right. So that's what makes this more exciting than like a standard anthology series. Is like the fact that like if you're a Stephen King junk, this sounds like this is going to be just a treat. This is
Shawshank Prison, isn't it?
This is like going to be like, you're going to have a nerdgasm.
Yeah. I also think it's interesting that a lot of the cast are alumni of like Stephen King movies.
Yes.
So Sissy Spacek from Carrie, Bill Skarsgård, who's Pennywise in the new version
this
of
is
It.
Definitely like 100% Stephen King fan service.
And then Terry O'Quinn, who we know from Lost, but who was also in Silver Bullet.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is all, it's a Stephen King play. It's not based on any particular Stephen King book. It's based on like his collected works, which is what's really interesting about it. And the thing we probably have to talk about when we're bringing this up is the Gunslinger.
Of course.
The Gunslinger book series, The Dark Tower.
The book series, which had like a very lackluster film, like,
yeah.
After people waited like literally years and years of their lives for this, and that's what they put out. But enough of that.
I was just going to say that the reason people were so excited about The Dark Tower is that it crossed over all of Stephen King's work.
Right, it crossed over all of Stephen King's work.
And they didn't even do that at all in the movie.
No, it's
but this one does. This show does. This show is like connective tissue for basically all of Stephen King's works. And that's a big part of what's so exciting about it. So a lot of people that were like waiting for The Dark Tower and were so disappointed. Now it's like, well, now we have Castle Rock to see how this works. The whole show is basically supposed to be connective tissue between all these different books.
Right.
So it's really going to be interesting to see how they pull that off and how they kind of give it its own identity at the same time. But, produced by J.J. Abrams. The show was created by Sam Shaw and Dustin Thomason, who, were the creators and showrunners of Manhattan, which was about the creation of the atom bomb. That was actually a pretty decent show that just kind of was on a small network. I think it was on WGN or something. But, looking forward to it. Looks good. That's going to be July 25th on Hulu.
Nice.
Next up is the one that we don't have any trailer or any video or anything of. They're just a few pieces of art that had just come out.
Just art, but I think without seeing anything, you know everything you need to know, because this is the new show by Matt Groening. This is obviously, do I even have to say this? I guess he created The Simpsons. He created Futurama. Yeah. This is probably going to be more closer to Futurama than The Simpsons.
Yeah, a little bit more.
It does have like I'm reading. This does have Billy West, Maurice LaMarche, John DiMaggio. So it has like a lot of people from Futurama already.
And it's got some other good people too. Eric Andre's in this.
Yeah, Eric Andre's in this. So this is going to be like a fantasy, like a send-up of fantasy. Where Futurama was a send-up of science fiction media, this is going to be a send-up of fantasy media. That's where the Futurama comparison comes in, besides just having like the same cast and like, being by the same creator. That's where the Futurama like comparison really comes in, rather than like a Simpsons comparison, because this is going to be less like a sitcom than like Futurama wasn't really a sitcom so much.
So Matt Groening is like, he has a very subversive style, and he's bringing that into like basically a fairy tale world. So it's fantasy, but it's more particular. It's closer to like a fairy tale.
Right.
But he's not going to be limited by that. I mean, if you watch Futurama, they cover like every range. And
they go all over the place in Futurama. That's why you can't say Futurama like is a parody of any one style or genre. They do everything.
Yeah. It's not even just a parody of science fiction. It is science fiction in its own right, and it not just parody of, but creating itself, original science fiction. It tells like dystopian stories, and it tells like spacefaring adventures. It has things that are reminiscent of Star Trek, things that are reminiscent of Star Wars, things that are, just all over the place. And this is going to basically, looks like it's going to be the fantasy what Futurama was too.
And say what you want about the current state of The Simpsons, or say what you want about the later years of Futurama.
I think Futurama is pretty solid all the way through.
Yeah, I think Groening, I think they have a solid crew behind this. I think they still have some juice to put out something quality. I'm still looking forward to this.
It's going to be interesting seeing a show like this drop in the Netflix style.
Yes.
With like all the episodes out at once.
That's good, yeah, because that hasn't happened with Matt Groening's show before, so that's going to be interesting. I suppose The Simpsons is something that you can binge watch.
Yeah,
sure,
but I mean,
I'm sure people do that
way.
It didn't come out that way, no.
Yeah. The closest is probably Futurama. They released like a series of directed DVD movies, and then they broke those down into episodes later and put those on TV when it was going through its like revival phase. But if you watch those movies, you were basically watching like 3 or 4 episodes of Futurama, like back to back, you know? So that's like about the closest to this experience that we've seen with like a Matt Groening property. But yeah, Disenchantment looks really good. I think might be the one I'm most excited about of all of these.
Yeah, I think so.
And then last on your list here is The Innocents.
I picked this because this could be interesting. I'm not so sure. I'm not completely sold on it, but it sounds like it has an interesting premise, and the trailer looked solid. You know, it's about shapeshifters. I guess they focused on this girl in the trailer, but I'm not sure, like, if it's just her, if there's, like, more people who can shapeshift.
I actually got, like, a very strong connection between the first one on our list that we talked about, Impulse, and this one, The Innocents. They seem like almost like they're in the same universe or something.
Yeah, it seems similar, right? Like
even the trailers both used like old songs.
Yes.
Like they used Heart of Glass and Impulse, and then The Innocents they used Where's My Mind, you know?
Yeah.
There's like a lot of similarity there. The entire series was directed by Farron Blackburn, who directed a bunch of episodes of Daredevil, as well as some of the other Netflix MCU shows, and Jamie Donahue, who directed a bunch of episodes of The Last Kingdom, that's the one, if you remember a long time ago when it first came out, I was describing it as like Fire Emblem Fates, the TV show.
Oh, that's right, you were.
That's The Last Kingdom. That's on Netflix too, by the way. But they're the ones that directed these episodes. The people that created it and the showrunners, they're relative newcomers. They've kind of worked in the industry, not in this capacity before. So there's not really a lot you can read into about like what it'll be like from that. And yeah, I mean, the biggest name attached to it is Guy Pearce from Memento, Count of Monte Cristo, bunch of movies, an Australian actor. He's one of the, I wouldn't say he's one of the lead, because the lead seems to be the young girl, Saoirse Groundswell's the name of the actress, and her boyfriend. They seem to be kind of like the leads.
Yeah, they seem to be the leads from the trailer.
But kind of like second to them is like Guy Pearce's character, basically. Right. So yeah, it's a girl discovers she can shapeshift. It seems like it happens in the same way. Based on the trailer, it looks like she's attacked by a guy and shapeshifts into him. And then that's kind of what the trailer is showing. And then Guy Pearce's character seems like maybe he has some ability too, or maybe he's, you know, also a shapeshifter or something, and he's going to try to insert himself into her life, or so. It's hard to tell from the trailer.
Right.
He expressed that he wanted to like help her or something like that. And that's kind of like, we don't really know too terribly much besides.
We don't know too much. The plot is kind of murky from the trailer.
Yeah.
We don't really know too much. It's just, it looked intriguing. It looked like a good premise. It looked like it could be good. It could also be awful. But it looked interesting, so I picked it.
And that's coming to Netflix on Friday, August 24th. So that's it. And those are the shows that we think are kind of look more interesting. And, you know, we already mentioned the shows that are returning that look kind of interesting, or that we already like. That's kind of the summer season. So it might not seem like it's, oh my God, amazing, huge shows left and right or something. But you have to remember, this is summer. 10 years ago, summer was reality TV and reruns.
Right.
So this is kind of a big deal that we have this much to look forward to in the summer. I mean, just from the returning shows alone, it's exciting. But you look at some of these new shows, I mean, Disenchantment and that Bobcat Goldthwait show, whew, I'm really looking forward to that. And
Castle Rock, yeah, there's some good stuff. Genuinely exciting stuff coming out this summer.
Castle Rock's going to be under a lot of scrutiny. Because that can go really well or can go really wrong, you know?
like most Stephen King things, right? Yeah. With Stephen King adaptations, it usually goes really well or really wrong. It's never in between, you know? Nobody's watched a Stephen King adaptation and just said, meh.
Yeah, pretty much. That's it for this segment. We're going to now go into our discussion of our 3 regular shows. So first up, we have Lost in Space. We're going to be talking about the last 3 episodes of the first season. Season 1, episode 8 through episode 10. The episode titles are Trajectory, Resurrection, and Danger Will Robinson.
Yes.
So what did you think of these last 3 episodes? Last week we were talking about how we were both kind of down on the show. Did the last 3 episodes redeem the show at all for you?
I think the last 2 episodes were the best of the season.
Mm-hmm.
I will say there's promise. There's some promise in those episodes, but there's still like a lot of things that bring the show down that leave me skeptical. like, the big thing, the elephant in the room is Dr. Smith. She just doesn't work.
You know what's funny is that when she first showed up at the end of the pilot, and we discussed that was the thing that we thought was the most interesting.
Yeah, because they could have done something interesting with her. They didn't. Like, what's her purpose now? Because
she has these big elaborate plans that make no sense.
Well, according to her, like, all her plans were like, because she was afraid of having to go back to the Resolute and, being locked away. Now that they're in their new predicament where they're like in some other unknown galaxy, there's no chance of her. The only people she's with are the Robinsons, and she's gonna have to survive with them.
And they all know who she is now.
And they all know who she is, but she's still gonna be like scheming against them and come up with elaborate plans for what reason?
I think the only chance they really have of doing anything interesting with her is if they give her like an actual redemptive arc.
Right.
And I just don't think they're going to.
I don't think though they're going to keep her to be the main bad guy, and it's like, why? Why is she doing anything? Why is she the bad guy now?
Yeah, she's just. It's just her plans are ridiculous because they just it's like huge leaps in logic. It's like, oh, if I do this, then I'll get this, and it's like, well, no, that if you do that, there's like a 1 in 1,000 chance you'll get what you want.
No, well, she does things with like this psychic self-awareness that the plot is going to go her way.
Yeah,
yeah,
and they make sense because it's like a 1 in 1,000 or less chance that it's going to go her way, and then it just does.
Yeah, and then it just does because that's the plot until it doesn't. Right at the end,
Even when it doesn't, it still kind of does.
So Dr. Smith was like the most downbeat of the entire season. Other than that, I just found the Robinsons as a whole to be like boring. The most interesting character in the season was Don West. Just because
interesting, maybe definitely the most fun.
Yeah, definitely the most fun. Well, just because, he seemed like the most well-rounded,
The most realistic too. His motivations are more realistic.
His motivations are more, he's not like scheming or some shit. His motivations were more realistic. Yeah, I mean, the stuff with the robot, I don't know.
It just seems weirdly put together, the stuff with the robot, because they showed how Will had developed this bond with this robot.
Yeah.
Like helping it fix itself and stuff. But then, Dr. Smith kind of put it together from scratch to this whole thing, and the only thing that gave it life was when she accidentally touched this one piece of metal by where the wrecked spacecraft was, which is we'd also seen Will do, except that Will had done it after the robot was already loyal to him.
Well, yeah, because my understanding was it bonded to Will because they had this moment, right?
Yeah, and that would have been more interesting if that's what they had stuck with.
But no, apparently, as long as you touch this thing and help this robot put itself together, it's going to be loyal to you.
It's just kind of weak, because I think it was more interesting that that somehow Will had bonded with this robot. And in a sense, some of that's still there because the robot was able to break away from its bonding with Dr. Smith and end up helping Will, but
you knew it was going to happen, but it doesn't follow any rhyme or reason,
Yeah, it's kind of, it doesn't really fit with what was going on.
And again, it's to service the stupid Dr. Smith plots, because their plots have to work no matter what, right? It's just confusing and muddled because it had to service this plot.
That's confusing and muddled.
Yeah. So
do you think that this is it for the other, as we called them, red shirts before, the other characters? Do you think this is just it for it? We're not going to see them at all in season 2?
I think we're going to see them sporadically in cameo appearances, but they're definitely no longer going to be a focus.
Because some of them are somewhat interesting. The site leader, Victor, he kind of initially was just a jackass, but by the very end of the season finale, he was somebody that kind of wouldn't necessarily agree with the Robinsons, but kind of was a little bit more logical and human.
Here's the thing that bothers me about the show. He was the only character to have a character arc.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, nobody else changed from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, right?
Don West did a little bit, but it's more he just came to his true self, that was already there.
Maybe, yeah.
He just kind of his more sketchy side of his character kind of went a little bit more. They
didn't really do too much with that to begin with, so.
Well, they just showed that he was kind of selfish and.
Yeah, showed he was kind of selfish in one episode and
they kind of and then they kind of tore that away a little bit.
Yeah, they tore that away.
But yeah, they didn't, again, they didn't do anything except for, Victor. They had Victor's son, VJ, who had a relationship with, Penny. Robinson.
That's another problem. There was no character arcs. All the shit Dr. Smith did and after everything that happened, she's the exact same person she was at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
There's no character arc for for her. She didn't like learn any lessons or change or grow, and I don't think that's going to be happening. So that's another big problem with the writing too, you know, like everybody is pretty much just static.
I did kind of like Penny and VJ's relationship just because it was awkward and it felt kind of honest.
Right.
In that awkward kind of way. I mean, there were developments in the story between the two of them that made no sense, but just the relationship had that kind of awkward youthfulness to it.
Again, another big problem with the season was because of plot. So if you saw something that didn't make sense or was awkward, it happened because the plot has to move in this direction.
Yeah. I think the strength of the series, when it did work, was always in like problem solving that was like more on the fun side, less on the desperate side.
Right.
Like I thought it was fun when they were able to escape the tar pit like a couple episodes ago.
I think the best parts of the season were the pure character moments, you know?
Yeah. Well, like the best part once they escaped the tar pit, but then like they started talking and it was like with their high helium voices, you know, and then they were like cracking up kind of like, you know, just how absurd it was as they were laying down exhausted and after having escaped, you know, like that was like a great moment. Or when they were doing in I think it was in episode 8 or maybe it was episode 9 when they were doing the test to try to get John able to pilot the ship, and they were going through all these trials over and over again, and it was kind of brutal. Like they had like the one rope or whatever that would pull back on him and knock him out, and they kept doing it over and over again. And Maureen Robinson, the mom, was being kind of like brutal about it, like again, and John's like, fuck. Like that kind of stuff worked, you know, like that was actually fun to watch. And then they start bringing in like the overly dramatic elements and the plotting and stuff, you know, that forced drama aspects. And that's when it started kind of falling apart.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And it's a shame that they separated from this group because there were some kind of human moments that had a lot to do with the interactions of these other characters. I liked the Japanese scientist, Hiroki, that was like was he like a botanist, or he did something like he studied species of different life forms or something. I thought he was really interesting on the show, like his interactions with the mom and with the kids, you know, I thought were cool. Like I said, I liked kind of the relationship between VJ and Penny just because it was like awkward in like a very like kind of honest way when it wasn't serving the plot. Like when they forced the plot aspects in there, that's when it hurt it. But when they were just kind of doing awkward, like, you know, teen dating aspects of it and it wasn't serving the plot, like it did work in those moments. And now it's like you're going to take that away, and what are you going to have for these kind of romance moments? You have the mother and the father, and you have Dawn West with maybe Penny, but even that feels like maybe she's a little bit too young where that's going to feel a little creepy.
No, wait.
Not Penny, Judy.
Judy, yeah, but they put in that line like, oh, she's 18, so she's legal, right? Like,
yeah, but even still, he's significantly older. He's like 30.
Yeah, he's like 30 or something, and she's like 18. So like, yeah, it's legal. He's not doing anything illegal, but still like in creepy territory. The actress herself, the actual actress is like 23, but
yeah, but the actual actor is probably like 40.
Yeah. So it's still like a little creepy. It's like in Twin Peaks when they wanted Dale Cooper to hook up with like the one girl.
Oh, Aubrey
Audrey. And it's like she was like really young and like
she's like a high school student.
Yeah, she was like a high school student. Like, yeah, what's his name? Oh, jeez, Dale Cooper. Like the actor there just said, nope, this plot's not happening.
Another character that I think we've mentioned before that they'd turned the character into a plot device, and it was really annoying earlier in the season, was Angela. She was the girl that ended up shooting up the robot, and Dr. Smith had like set her up, and we'd had this whole thing where like, oh, she was unconscious.
Well, she was unconscious.
Being dragged around, and we were like, oh, this is cool. We have this character, and it's like, and they turned her just into a plot tool.
Yeah, she was just a plot device to further Dr. Smith's retarded. Like, Dr. Smith is going to take control of the robot plot, right?
But in the last couple episodes, they made it look like, oh, maybe there is a chance that they could make this character.
She was like in like
interesting relationship.
She was like in a couple like scenes in like the last 2 episodes, which amounted to fuck all, and now she's gone from the series for good. You know, yeah. And so it's like, really? I mean, that's another problem I have with the show. Like, it looked like they set up a character just to use as a plot device for something else. Like, why?
I think that part of the problem here is the kind of thing that we don't see as much, but like cable channels and when streaming services have started to kind of take over in just like sheer amount of content and popularity from like where networks used to be. It used to be networks produced way more content than everybody else. And now it's like Netflix is producing more content than all four of the networks combined. And I think part of the problem is that when you have a show like Lost in Space that isn't necessarily being handled by the absolute best talent at hand, there's no room to course correct. With TV shows like on networks, when they would have these long runs, they'd do like 13 episodes and then they'd have what was called the back nine. And there'd be a little hiatus between the 13 episodes and the back nine. They'd start filming the back nine towards the end of when the 13 episodes were airing. But that meant that like by that point they were like by the time they were writing the 14th episode of the show, like the first like 7 or so had already aired. Mm-hmm. And because of that, when they were writing it, they could course correct. They could say, oh, this plot didn't work. You know, like people did not resonate with this storyline. And so they could adjust it. Like, you know, a perfect example of that is in Lost. In the 3rd season, they gave us those two characters, Nikki and Paolo.
Oh, God.
And people hated them. Yeah. And so like I think it was maybe the 1st or 2nd episode of the back 9 of that season, they just killed them off. Like right away.
They just killed them off. And I just thought, God, it's pointless. Like, why? I don't know. I hated them, and then they killed them off, and I hated them even more for just being pointless and a waste of time.
But like, as much as that was annoying, it opened up season. Like, imagine if instead they had filmed that entire season and made Nikki and Paolo like essential to the plot of like, you know, that season in the end, because the end of season 3 of Lost was actually really good.
Yeah, the end of season 3 was actually really good. Like,
now imagine if that had all been weighed down by the bad choices from the beginning of season 3.
That's true. That would have brought down season 3 would probably have gone down as like people had been saying like one of the worst seasons of Lost, you know, like they would have been infamous.
Yeah, which makes me think like, what if Lost in Space, like instead of giving us all 10 episodes at once and they were all done at once, what if there was an opportunity for them to course correct? And this actually goes into something Netflix has been doing, not necessarily for the reasons I'm mentioning, but Netflix is starting to do where they're like releasing half of a season. I think in the case of like, you know, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, like the new season just came out. It's the first half of the new season. I think the entire season's actually already been filmed. So this wouldn't cover what I'm talking about at all. It would have nothing to do with it. But an example of where it would was that they had that one show about kind of like the origins of hip hop. I can't remember the name of it, but they put the first season out before they were done because it was just taking them longer than they thought. Because of that, it would give them a chance. I don't know if they actually did course correct, but it would have given them a chance to course correct based on the way people reacted to the first half. So maybe it would be better if we did have seasons divided for that purpose, you know, just for that purpose.
Right.
Because I think Lost in Space could have had a much better, tighter second half if like the grievances of the first half had come to light before they were already done filming the second half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I get where you're going with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's weird because like I didn't think I'd ever go like, we should implement the network system, you know, like it's always for me been about getting away from the network system. It's always been for the better, but not every show is going to be run by a Brian Fuller or a Noah Hawley, you know?
Right. No, I mean, and I'm not expecting like, yeah.
And the shows that aren't being run by true masters,
but you don't have to be
that need to be, they're going to need course correction though, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean,
like I could see Lost in Space potentially getting much better in its second season based on criticism of the first. It has potential to do that. I don't know if it will, but it has the potential to do that now. You know, they can say, ooh, a lot of people had issues with this. Let's address that when we go into the second season. But man, we had to sit through 10 episodes of that problem, you know?
Yeah.
So that's just what I was thinking. That was just a thought I had on that. But overall, anybody listening could probably tell, and if you've listened to our past podcasts, we went into Lost in Space really excited, and we're kind of exiting pretty disappointed.
No, yeah, I was pretty disappointed. Like I'm probably not going to tune in for next season because there's potential, but I just...
Yeah, I should clarify that we are not going to cover season 2 of Lost in Space on this podcast. Nope. So if you're thinking that we will, and that's why I'm saying maybe it'll be better next season, like no, we're still not going to cover it. Even if I watch it, we're not going to be actively covering it. I don't think it necessarily... I think it's proven itself to not necessarily be worth the amount of coverage that we give to the shows we focus on. You know, I'd rather focus on another show that deserves it more. And that's a little sad to say because like after the first episode, I was actually really digging it, but that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Yep. Sure is.
So let's move on to one of these shows that's more worth talking about. Let's move on to Legion. Season 2, episode 9, also chapter 17.
Yes, chapter 17.
So this episode actually it took back again, like it kind of stepped back a bit from the progress of the last episode, which really felt like there was a lot of momentum taking place. And we kind of jumped back a bit and said, oh, okay, well, what was happening with some of these other characters here? Mainly with Melanie, where they were showing kind of a lot of her side of the story. I didn't necessarily like the aspects with Melanie. I thought like I'd kind of already had, figured out what was going on with her. I didn't really need it spelled out to me.
Yeah, I didn't need it spelled out. She's obviously like her husband managed to get into her head and manipulate her, in service of the Shadow King, who is manipulating him in turn, right? So we got that. So she's out of it, right? She's completely out of it. And she's been cooped up in her room, walled off from everybody, just wallowing in her delusions, while the Shadow King and her husband, work to manipulate her for their gain, or for Shadow King's gain, really. Yeah.
They had him singing "My Body Lies Over the Ocean."
Yeah, my body lies over the ocean, just really leaning heavily into that relationship that they have, Shadow King's really leaning hard into that to get her
back
on
my body to me. That's all he wants.
That's all he wants, yeah.
What's interesting about this episode, I think, is that I don't think that there was really, outside of like other characters having quick like flashes where they recognized him, there was like David wasn't even in this episode at all.
No, he wasn't even. Yeah,
like only like basically like the Carries like remembering when he put the thoughts in their head, things like that. That's like the only times we had with David.
The only times David showed up were when Carrie and stuff were remembering him putting the thoughts in her head. Like he literally doesn't show up. The main focus points of this episode were Carrie and they're both named Carrie. All right, Carrie and
Carrie.
That's why I couldn't think of it. The main focus points were Carrie, and Carrie, and Lenny and
Melanie. Yeah, and so like the two Carries had one part of the story, Lenny had another part of the story, and Melanie had another part of the story. Like I said, I wasn't really too much into Melanie's side story just because it was all, I didn't need it spelled out to me. Right. And it was mostly just kind of sad seeing how messed up she was because of her husband and Farouk.
The major focus of this episode of all three stories, the biggest focus was Lenny's story, right? Yeah. And basically, and you know what, like, they're
best
actually
lesbian sex scene since season 3 of Hannibal.
Yes, best lesbian sex scene since season 3 of Hannibal. But there's not really a lot going on in this episode, right? It's pretty simple. So you have stuff going on with Melanie that we just talked about. With Lenny, it's still, again, it's simple. We see Lenny's trying to get back to her old life, her life of drug use and debauchery. And, she says at one point, she says, I'm gonna do Caligula level things because I am loose now, right? Yeah. But there's a problem with Lenny because since she inhabits the body of David's sister, she's got like David's sister's consciousness like haunting her now, and she's haunting her. She gets up on her and she says, "Are you a good person? Are you a good person?" And Lenny can't answer the question.
It's like, well, I'm not the worst.
And she's like, I'm not the worst, until she disappears. So she's got this going on, right? And at one point, while Lenny's trying to ignore this and just get on with, what she's doing, which is really a whole bunch of nothing, just doing drugs and, having sex, so she's trying to ignore this and try to get on with her lifestyle. And eventually the thing David implanted in her mind activates, right? And she starts seeing those visions, the electric octopus, but she can't piece it together. It's not instant like with the other people, like they instantly, as soon as they activate, they instantly knew what to do, right?
Like, we need to grab the weapon, we need to get to the car.
We need to grab the weapon. With the Carries, like they knew immediately. And but Lenny's just confused by these visions. Right? She doesn't really know. And the person who does know is David's sister, her consciousness, she knows exactly what David implanted and what's supposed to, and she, so she kind of steers Lenny in the right direction for that. And she kind of,
between them when Lenny like had to come to admit that she loves David.
Right. That she loves her, that she thinks she's in love with David.
Yeah.
Least, right.
Well, she has some kind of semblance of love for him. Yeah. Definitely. There definitely is some form of love, whether it's romantic love or not. She's confused by it, I think, as well.
She is confused by it as well, I think so. And you can see there's even like a tinge of jealousy when she brings up David's girlfriend, like I'm not perfect, like Miss Perfect or something she calls her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically she's convinced to do this out of love for David, because she, David's sister kind of manipulates her, saying, well, David needs you. And she's like, oh, he needs me? Interesting,
Yeah, I think there is legitimate love.
There is legitimate love
from her. There's a question of what kind of love it is. If it could be the influence of the fact that she's in his sister's body could be influencing that semblance of love. It could also be just the fact that she was with David in his head. So there's like a part of her, and she had like kind of free reign when she was in David's head, unlike with the Shadow King.
Yeah,
she was under like tight lock and key.
Free reign. Like if there's anybody close to David, like closer than himself, it would be her, with all the time she spent in his head, right? Mm-hmm. So she's definitely developed an attachment. Whether that's love, it's hard to say, because she is a fractured mind. She is a fractured soul. There's no guarantee that anything that she's thinking at any point is sane, or what you can consider sane.
I think there's almost a guarantee it isn't.
There's almost a guarantee it isn't. So whether it's like love in the actual sense, well, you're dealing with somebody who's insane, so who knows? But it's enough to motivate her to do what David wants her to do, right? Which is to get the weapon that Carrie dropped off for her.
That was actually, I enjoyed the stuff with Carrie and Carrie. I always enjoy their conversations with female Carrie having like a severe lack of certain common sense and certain knowledges, that she doesn't have.
Because up till this point,
expressions, and she's taking them all literally.
Because she doesn't have like human experience, because up until this point she has existed as part of Carrie, and she only came out when she was needed, right? Mm-hmm. When they needed somebody to like kick ass. So she hasn't really existed as a full human being, unlike Carrie has, right? And so they're in a situation now where they're separated and they can coexist outside of each other. And so she's kind of having to experience being human. And so there's a lot of stuff she doesn't know. And it's easy to forget that, but then those scenes come up where like she doesn't know simple expressions like feeling blue, right?
Yeah.
Or time on, he mentions like time on your hands, and she starts looking at her hands. Yeah. She doesn't, and it was a really touching moment between them two, because Carrie acknowledges that he's getting old and there's a point where he's going to die, and that she is going to be alone. And it's like a morbid thought, and
her response to it is very childish.
I'm not going to die. I'm going to shoot death twice, if he even tries anything. Yeah,
it's very childish. It's like a little kid learning about, mortality for the first time, and the kid's parents telling the kid, well, one day I'm not going to be here. And the kid going, no, you're always going to be here. I'm not going to let you go away.
Yeah.
As if they have some semblance of control.
Yeah, as if it shows that she doesn't understand the concept of mortality. That's beyond her comprehension right now. She doesn't know or understand that people die,
Yeah. So it's really like kind of touching scene to watch, because it's kind of funny, it's kind of cute, and at the same time it's kind of sad.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. It's a nice character moment for those two, in this episode.
They end up bringing the weapon in the car. They're supposed to just kind of like leave, but they're like watching. They're too curious, especially, the female Carrie is too curious about what's going to happen. And then through that, they notice.
Yeah, they notice
Lenny
coming to pick it up, and they don't know that's supposed to happen. So they kind of rush out there to stop her. Mm-hmm. But then the car just like zaps to the desert where David is, where it's supposed to be.
I love that it like catches fire and she's kind of walking away as it's on fire, and then she's like, oh yeah, and she like runs back and kicks the trunk open.
She kicks the trunk open, grabs the weapon. She was going to forget the weapon completely. Oh god. Yeah. Carrie says it's fine because he has a tracker on the weapon, so they can go find it.
It's just a matter of how they're going to get there.
It's just a matter of how they're going to get there. But I'm sure in some way that's part of David's plan too, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm sure David, the only part that's not going well is the one guy there.
Clark, the guy with the burned face.
Yeah, Clark is not going to make it because of Melanie and because of the Shadow King manipulating Melanie. So we know that at least that part of David's plan isn't going to go to plan, and we're going to see how Clark's absence changes things when it's time to act.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it for the episode.
Yeah.
We won't be talking about this, we finished Lost in Space, so we're not going to be talking about that again at all. Legion, we're going to talk about it after it's finished, so there's 2 more episodes left, and we're going to talk about those 2 together.
We're going to pick it back up when I get back from my vacation in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So 2 weeks weeks after, well, there's 2 weeks off and then, so the third week, so 3 weeks.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll talk about it after it's already done. We'll talk about the last 2 episodes together. But now we're going to be talking about Westworld. So this is season 2, episode 6, Phase Space. We had talked last week about how they'll focus on like 2 characters at a time, because there's like 4 real central characters right now. There's Dolores, Maeve, Bernard, and the Man in Black. And those are like the 4 main stories that are really being focused
on. They kind of focused on all 4 this episode.
Yeah. Like we talked last week about how they had, paired up Dolores and Maeve for the episode, and that we kind of felt like,
because
it was just Maeve for that episode.
Because up to this point they've been pairing up. They've been focusing on 2 at a time.
Yeah, right? I feel even more so that they probably should have left that last episode to be all about Maeve, because the Dolores story, which was such a drag last week, actually kind of had more oomph to it this week.
Yeah, it did. Well, I mean, and I think maybe we say like they should have focused on Maeve and stuff, but then we realize now we're on episode 7 of a 10-episode season, and the stuff with Dolores' story in this episode really wouldn't work unless we saw the context previous episode.
It would have if they didn't cover all 4 stories. Like if they had covered the entire.
But like I said, we're on episode 7.
Well, this was episode 6.
Yeah, we're on episode 6. We're on episode 7 now. We really don't have time to dedicate the episode to Shogun World. They would have had to add an extra episode. It's becoming plain that maybe the 10 episodes is a little bit restrictive for the story they're going for. We talked recently about how, like, with Marvel, we think 13 episodes might be too much. Maybe in this case for Westworld, 10 episodes is maybe too little.
It could be, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Especially considering they took 2 years to make this season.
Yeah.
So it should have been enough time for them to maybe fit in another episode or 2 to really kind of get more content out. But I still think they could have done Shogun World all in last week's episode, and if they had just taken the aspects of Shogun World that were in this episode and also moved those to last week's episode, and then they could have gotten through Dolores' story and just not had Maeve's story in this episode. I think they could have done it. Like, I think it could have worked better that way, because I do think that, or they could have, covered some of the other stories going on besides Dolores instead of Dolores' story, because it was such a drag last week.
But we can see from this episode that both Maeve and Dolores' stories progressed significantly to a point they needed to be, and we needed that context.
We still could have had that context,
because Teddy's completely different now. Obviously, they can't cut back Dolores' story and have Teddy suddenly be different without
I don't knowing why. I don't mean they should have cut out Dolores' story from the last episode from the series, just from the episode, and then had Maeve's story from this episode in last episode.
Right, but it wouldn't have worked that way.
And then moved Dolores' stuff from last episode and this episode into this episode.
Right.
I think it could have happened. I think if it was shuffled around a little bit, it could have happened. Or if they had even just paired Dolores' story with a different, or not Dolores, Maeve's story in Shogun World with a different character, just because Dolores it just brought it down so much in the last episode.
I mean, it is what it is now, and what it is so we got Dolores' story. Dolores didn't have much story in this episode. It was more to show that Dolores' stuff was more to show that Teddy's changed. Like, she made Teddy ruthless, which is what she wanted.
And now she's struggling with that a little bit.
And now she's struggling with that a little bit because, she made Teddy ruthless, and they took over the train, and now they are on the train, and that was basically Dolores' entire plot for the episode. It wasn't much with Dolores.
It was more about Teddy and just how ruthless he is now.
Yeah, it was more about
her reaction to that.
And her kind of reaction. Yeah, it was more about that. It was more to see this is the consequences of what happened from last episode.
Where Teddy's just as brutal as Dolores was in the last couple episodes.
Yes.
He finds out he doesn't need any more information from one of the Delos people. The guy's like crying. He's like, I don't have anything else. I don't have any other information. And Teddy just shoots him right in the head. And he's like, well, we don't need him anymore. And just kind of like is so blasé about it. And it's like, that's kind of, it's maybe a little bit more ruthless than what Dolores was doing, but not too far off the bat. But it takes Dolores, it takes her aback a bit to see that from like an outside perspective. So I think that that's kind of what the whole point of Teddy being so ruthless here is that we're seeing, Dolores is seeing like her own actions basically from a different perspective.
Yeah.
It's the same thing she would have done, but now she's seeing somebody else do it, and that's causing her to kind of be a little bit shocked by it.
What about the scene that the episode opened with with Dolores and Bernard, and it's kind of a fake out because we think it's happened past, and
it's Dolores and Arnold.
It's Dolores and Arnold until Dolores like takes control, right? And then we reveal that it's Bernard. Dolores takes control of Bernard, tells him stop all more functions, and she basically tells him, because apparently she had Bernard going on like he was Arnold and supposedly reliving something that Arnold like had said that Arnold was doing with Dolores and the things he said, and Bernard says something that was off, and that's when Dolores calls him out on it, right?
Yeah, and then she reveals that she's testing him and with the keyword for fidelity.
For fidelity, which we know what that, we saw that before. So that raises a new question about the nature of Bernard, because we know that they were experimenting with human DNA. They were experimenting with trying to make people immortal by...
Well, I think it's clear that this isn't Delos experimenting.
Right.
This is either Dolores and her group experimenting sometime off in the future, or it's Robert Ford's experimentation when he first created Bernard.
So the question this raises is Bernard actually Arnold?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, we don't know when this took place. This could be ahead of where we're seeing Dolores now and be her trying to make Arnold, or it could be when Bernard first came to be.
Right. We don't know. It's completely ambiguous. It's not touched upon again in this episode. But
I think it's Robert Ford.
It's almost like another, like on the level of the revelation that Bernard was not human in the first place. And now it's like, is Bernard a clone of Arnold? Because if Bernard is actually Arnold, like that's another giant revelation about his character, you know? Yeah.
It's kind of like Bernard was based on Arnold and he's actually a robot. And it's like, but now that robot that is Bernard is actually a copy of Arnold.
Actually a copy of Arnold, yeah.
Not just in the image of, but actually like a copy
actually Arnold, you know, like.
Yeah. In the same way that they were trying to rebuild James Delos.
Right. Which was James Delos because they were using his DNA. It was his actual mind. It wasn't like a robot mind. Like it's a human mind in a robot body. It's meant to be immortality. But we know from James Delos that the human mind was the mind was rejecting the body, right? It wasn't working. But that
was Delos, not what Robert Ford was doing. Yeah.
So if that proves true with Arnold, then we could say that
Robert Ford was way ahead of Delos.
Yeah, Robert Ford was way ahead of Delos. And
because he had secrets. I mean, Delos still doesn't know that Bernard is a host.
Yeah, Delos doesn't know that Bernard. Yeah, only Robert Ford knew Bernard was a host, right? Delos didn't know. Delos still doesn't know as far as the timeline goes, right?
Also, as far as we know.
As far as we know, yeah, Delos still doesn't have any clue. So they don't know everything Robert Ford was up to. You know, he was hiding a lot from them, and apparently a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's what this seems to be. Like we said, we don't know for sure when the timeline is for this and what exactly it means yet, but it seems to be that this is Robert Ford's programming of Bernard.
Yeah, of Bernard.
And also, it throws interesting wrinkle into the power struggle between Ford and Delos that was all throughout the second season.
And also we get this is a conversation between Dolores and Bernard, but we also get a sense that Robert Ford maintains some level of control over these robots, right? So it could be kind of
got an idea of where that comes from now.
Yeah, we got an idea where that comes from. So that could be Ford speaking through Dolores, you know, because we've seen it in other parts of the episode where robots, you know, where these robots who are supposed to be sentient, they just stop, and like we see it with the Man in Black, they just stop and they say things to the Man in Black that, you know, those messages come from Robert Ford.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
And so we're getting that, you know, that could be what we're getting again here. We don't know, but what we do know is that, or what we think we know now at least, is that Robert Ford's ability to interact with and take over these robots and everything stems down to the cradle, which is a spot they'd referred to it all before, and we get kind of our first look at it this time. It looks like a giant server room, basically. And it is like a hive mind of like backups of all the hosts. And Bernard goes into the cradle, you know, with kind of a really painful looking scene where he gets hooked up onto this machine that's designed to go into the heads of the mechanical host, like the ones that we've seen, like the younger version of Robert Ford, where it's like articulating metal pieces versus like the bioorganic ones that the hosts are now. And it's like designed to take out kind of the brains, the host brains out of those things. But Bernard goes in instead, and it like basically cuts into him and pulls out his mind. Great acting on the part of Jeffrey Wright, as you see like his face go blank, like when it pulls out, you know, it goes from him like kind of like grunting in pain to like his face just going slack.
His face just goes black. Yeah, like great acting from him. Yeah, he goes into this machine, I guess, to extract information from himself. This puts him...
It's basically like a VR world version of Sweetwater, the main town.
Yeah, I guess we're seeing what's happening inside of his mind at this point, and he is back in Sweetwater. He wakes on the train, he goes into Sweetwater, everything's familiar. I'm just wondering, and the whole time I'm just wondering, okay, where are we supposed to be seeing here? Because, yeah, Sweetwater, yeah, okay. He runs into Robert Ford. So this also backs up that theory that there's an aspect of Robert Ford that he left inside of the robots, right?
In the cradle, apparently, which is like the big AI center of the whole park.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. He's in the cradle. So Robert Ford left an aspect of himself in the cradle. So it seems to be that Robert Ford is influencing what's happening in the park, even post-mortem. Right. Robert Ford still has control. And that might be his most ingenious move ever. Just have himself die and everybody believe he's dead while he's still, or an aspect of himself is still able to control things.
What's interesting here also is that we've had a lot of explanation about the cradle in this episode.
Yeah.
Through Bernard's story, not just from Bernard directly, but we also see the character of
head of security, right? And
we see like Charlotte, for instance, talking to Ashley Stubbs, who's the head of security at Westworld, and she's talking about how they're trying to get into the cradle, but every single time they like try to hack in, it's like blocking them in a completely different way. Like it's too intelligent. They can't get in.
Intelligent, and they figure out, or they assume, and it's not confirmed, but it's implied, right, that the stuff that's happening in the park, that the robots going haywire, becoming self-aware, that maybe the cradle is to blame for this. Like maybe the cradle, everything that's happening is being orchestrated by the cradle, it would seem. Yeah. They can't access it to find out, and they can't find out where the commands are coming from. But like, and Ashley, the head of Ashley Stubbs, you know, he basically, or no, was it him, or I think it was like another guy, a scientist talking. He basically says, well, that's impossible, because like the cradle's supposed to be a backup, right? Cradle is supposed to be...
It's not an active mind, it's just data.
Yeah, it's not an active mind, it's just data. It's supposed to just be data. It's supposed to be a backup so that everything continues to run smoothly in case something does go wrong with the main thing, right? So it's supposed to be a backup. And he's like, okay, well, if the cradle's issuing this command, then the cradle's gone completely haywire, right? But I think now we're clear that the cradle hasn't gone haywire. It's Robert Ford.
Yeah, Robert Ford is basically in control of the cradle.
Yeah. Robert Ford
his mind is in the cradle and is controlling it. And we saw the cradle, and it's like I said, it's like a server room made up of like a ton of those, like the host brains. There's like spheres. And it's just like they're like all over the place in there.
Yeah,
all wired together like a giant server room.
And when we go to Bernard's story, you know, Bernard keeps flashing back to memories where, you know, he's commanded to go into the cradle and to deposit host brains and all this stuff. You know, we saw last episode he was commanded to kill people, presumably to harvest their DNA. And we know, at least for those parts, that those commands were coming from Ford in the past. So I think this episode revealed a huge piece of the puzzle regarding Robert Ford, in that Robert Ford may be dead, but he's not dead. And that's probably his greatest trick of all.
What's the old quote? Like, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Yes. Yeah, that was the quote from, yep.
But yeah, that's kind of what Robert Ford's kind of been doing here. But let's talk a little bit about Samurai World.
Yes.
That was kind of the big thing with the last episode.
This was the big thing that so this episode wraps up Shogun World. You know, this episode was kind of like our goodbye to Shogun World, for now at least.
Yeah. I don't see any reason for them to go back. I mean,
I don't see any reason to go back. You know, it still exists. They're still there. So, you know, never say never. We can return at some point, but I don't think it's happening this season. But this was our goodbye, and what a goodbye goodbye because there are still some loose ends to tie up in Shogun World, and it leads to one of the most spectacular fight scenes in the series so far.
Yeah,
right?
Musashi, who is basically the Shogun World version of Hector, but is named Musashi after Miyamoto Musashi, who's a real life samurai, really famous. So that's what he's named after. That's his character. And they draw fully upon his namesake by invoking his two-sword style, showing him take up a stance that's almost identical to, there's a Japanese novel by Eiichi Yoshikawa named Musashi that's about Musashi, and there's a cover, and he takes like that exact stance. I mean, it's total fan service to people who are really into samurai stuff. But we see Musashi and Tanaka, who is Musashi's underling when Musashi was working for the daimyo.
Right.
And they'd referenced that in the last episode. And we saw him, and we actually finally get their duel. Musashi kind of talks him into a fight, and they fight, and Musashi kicks his ass. Chops off one of his hands, and then like immediately like gives him back one of his swords, and Musashi aids him in committing seppuku.
Yeah, Musashi aids him in committing seppuku. He cuts off his head. That's such a badass scene. And then we say goodbye to Shogun World. Maeve begs them to come along, but they decide that their fate is to stay in Shogun World.
Akane kind of throws Maeve's words back at her, because when Musashi was going to fight Tanaka, Akane was like, help him, use your witchcraft or whatever.
Use your witchcraft. And she's like, no, everybody has a right to their own fate, even if that fate is death, right?
And she throws that right back at Maeve when Maeve is asking them to go with her.
Yeah, Maeve is doing more than that. She's like begging, she's pleading with them. And Akane throws her words right back at her. She says the same thing. She says, everybody has the right to choose their own fate, even if that fate is death. And this is why I choose to stay here.
Yeah. So yeah, they end up going down into one of the access points. There's like a whole bunch of dead bodies in this village where some shit's gone down. And they end up going down. They have to take it like a slide, and they get down there, all of them. And they end up exiting, and it's the fields that we've seen in Maeve's flashbacks. So we know this is where Maeve was when she was on the prairie with her daughter.
Yeah. Maeve tells everybody to stay behind while she goes and scopes out the house, and she finds her daughter. Her daughter is there, but her daughter has a new mom,
Yeah.
It's not the same thing. And
they reprogrammed Maeve and moved her to another position.
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean they just left the other character there with no story.
Obviously they recast Maeve's role for that story, right?
It's kind of a callback to like the very first episode of the series when we saw Dolores' father recast.
Yeah, that's true. Maeve, knowing what she knows at this point, she's a little bit naive to not think that would be the case.
Yeah.
But
that's also, it's very, very human of her.
Right.
To not think that far ahead, to just think, oh, I'm going to get my daughter and then everything's going to be all right.
And then while she's dealing with the fact she's no longer this girl's mom, that's when the Native Americans come, and, that storyline replays itself, right? And Maeve starts having like flashbacks. Everybody else gets involved to help her, and then the writer there, Lee, he just conspires to ditch her and get out of there. He'd
taken a walkie-talkie from one of the dead Delos soldiers in Shogun World that was like strung up.
Yes.
That was in the last episode. So he had this walkie-talkie he'd been hiding, and
that's right.
Using it to communicate.
And he's using it to communicate to call Delos to get them, really stabbing them in the back.
It's funny because it's him and Felix and Sylvester that are together when he does this.
Yeah.
And Sylvester's just kind of like hanging out there like, okay, yeah, that's cool. Let's get rescued. Felix is like, I can't believe you assholes.
Yeah.
He's fully on board the host train now.
Yeah, he's fully on board with Maeve, at this point. Because,
he's like, I'm going to go help Maeve. And he kind of takes off and leaves the two of them.
Because, you know what? Because Felix was there when Maeve became self-aware. He was there with Maeve from the very beginning. And I think Felix, to his credit, he sees Maeve for what she is. So he's with her.
Yeah. And so the way this storyline ends is that as Maeve is dealing with the Indians coming on her and her group are coming back and fighting off some of the Indians, one of the Indians, which is the tribal chief and the one we also saw talking to Logan in like the second episode of the season in the modern time setting outside of Westworld, is named Akacheta. He's the elder of the Ghost Nation Indians. He tells Maeve, come with me, we're on the same path.
Yeah.
Which some people I've seen online have discussed it being like, oh, he's on board the rebellion like Dolores. And I'm like, no, he's not. Like, there's been no communication between Ghost Nation and Dolores.
Yeah, there's no communication. We don't know what he means by same path, but
he's doing some interesting things. Like, we don't know what Akacheta's path is. We don't really know what that is. If he's part of Robert Ford's plan or if he's part of something else, but we know that he was holding Ashley Stubbs hostage. And then we thought like, oh, they were going to sacrifice him. And then he just turned out he was just testing their metal. And then he like let them go. So like, we don't really understand like what his role is and what path he's taken. If he's part of the Ford narrative or if he's got an entirely different path, or if maybe we know that somebody was somewhat controlling Maeve's awakening last season. In the season finale, there was a moment where she confronted that, where it was like, is my escape part of some plan that somebody else programmed into me, or is it my own will? And they came to that, questioning that at the end of last season. So perhaps he's part of that. So whoever is pulling strings in that area he's connected to, or that could still be Ford, we don't know. But anyways, now we know that he's like reaching out to Maeve and basically saying that they're on the same path.
Yes. Although Maeve is not inclined to reach out because, she has those memories of what happened.
Yeah.
And,
she's not separating.
She's not separating that from, those memories she has. She's trying to save her daughter. That was a traumatic incident for her, that she's still reliving. So
even though it was scripted, and even though she now knows that it was scripted, she can't get past it.
Right.
At least not yet.
She still has PTSD from it.
And that leaves the last storyline in this episode, which is the Man in Black. Not too much going on here. Mainly it's just him hanging out with his daughter.
Just some moments with his daughter, right?
At first he like basically says like, fuck you, Ford. You think I'm going to fall for this? Like, so he clearly thinks that his daughter is a host.
Yeah, he thinks his daughter is a host, or if not a host, like Ford orchestrated it for her to be there to like pull him off the path. He definitely thinks this is Ford's hand.
Yeah.
And so that's what he says. And she convinces him that it's not.
Seemingly convinces him.
Well, she seemingly convinces him that it's not, but she tries to pull him off of his path. He makes it pretty obvious to her that he has no plans of going home with her, but she won't give it up. So
she apologizes for basically putting her mother's death on him. And
yeah, she makes it clear that she has no plans of giving up. So he lies to her and says he's going to give in, to kind of get her to back off. And then as soon as he gets the chance, he ditches her. And so that's basically that. So she goes off to find him because, in his mind, he's playing the game. He's playing the game for set for him, and she doesn't understand it. She thinks he's suicidal and she wants to save him before he gets himself killed.
Yeah, she thinks he wants to go out in a blaze of glory, which very well might be the case.
Yeah, very well might be the case. Yeah.
I don't think it's that simple as just wanting to go out in a blaze of glory. I think there's more to it, but
well, no, because if he wanted to just go,
he could
do that easily in that place.
There's a little more to it, at least.
He's clearly trying to stay alive, at least for a time being.
Yeah. And the way this story ends is he ditches her, she wakes up and he's already gone. And then he and Hector and one of Hector's cousins, the other one who stayed behind with her, are off on horseback and they get ambushed by the Ghost Nation Indians. And what's interesting here is this possibly puts the Man in Black in the same region or near the same region as Maeve.
Yeah. So it puts them on a potential collision course, which is interesting because the Man in Black did some not nice things to Maeve.
He's part of her PTSD.
Yeah, he's part of her PTSD because he was there when the Ghost Nation attacked and, she lost her daughter, Those are her memories, He shoots her in her memories, He is the reason she's not able to defend her daughter from the Ghost Nation because he murders her. That's part of it. So
Black was experimenting with the story and
he was experimenting with
cruelty and
that was his first act of cruelty. Like that's what he said last season, right? That was his first major act of cruelty in the park because he was experimenting with just being a cruel asshole.
Yeah.
And now it looks like that's going to come back to bite him in the ass.
So it's like the kind of the different plot threads are converging again. So we have Bernard and Dolores' story look like they're converging as Dolores is literally, her train is ramming home into the Delos, the main kind of area where Delos is all located right now, including Bernard. And then you have what seems like, we don't know for sure, but it seems like the Man in Black is on course to encounter Maeve. So that we're going to end up going from like 4 separate areas of story to 2. Perhaps. We'll see how that happens when the next episode comes. But that's it for Westworld this week. Will's not going to be with us for the next 2 weeks, but we are still going to be talking about Westworld week to week. And then Will's going to come back and we still have 2 more episodes when Will comes back, and we'll be doing those for another 2 weeks with Will back. So
Yes.
look forward to more Westworld discussion on this podcast with Will and without before. So until then, here's what's coming up in the week ahead. By the time this podcast is available on Friday, June 1st, CB Strike comes to Cinemax. It's based on the detective novels written by J.K. Rowling she used a pen name and wrote these so that it wouldn't just be a bunch of Harry Potter fans looking for magic in them. But those are coming to a series now on Cinemax. Then on Saturday, June 2nd, FLCL returns to Adult Swim, FLCL Progressive. So we had mentioned this in the previous segment we recorded. We talked about it as one of the returning shows that was interesting. And so yeah, I'm still hoping that there's some kind of a subtitled option, but that's going to be on Saturday, June 2nd. Then on Sunday, June 3rd, Pose comes to FX. This is the last FX series with Ryan Murphy, because Ryan Murphy signed a big deal with Netflix. So he's at Netflix now.
At Netflix now, yeah.
So Pose is his last show. It's about drag queens at some kind of a club, I think, where they do performances. Something like that. That's what Pose is. It's described as like a musical drama, I think. And then on that same day, Succession comes to HBO. It's another big drama series. On Monday, June 4th, Dietland comes to AMC. It's about an overweight woman working for a fashion magazine, ghostwriting as the editor-in-chief of the magazine, doing like an advice column. And she gets like swept up into these like cult-like groups that are like murdering people or something. It's some weird subversive kind of story. It's supposed to be like have that same kind of weirdness of like, you know, like Mr. Robot or Fight Club, in the sense that she gets involved with some group that's like dangerous.
Okay, sure.
On that same day though, The Fosters returns to Freeform for its last season, and 5 Points. I believe this is the first Facebook Watch original series. So this is like Facebook
Watch
content. Yeah.
Yeah. How about Facebook?
Scripted entertainment.
How about Facebook not watch? Sorry, Zuck.
Yeah, that's going to be me not watching. But Tuesday, June 5th, Younger comes to TV Land. Teachers returns to TV Land. Humans returns to AMC. I described Humans before saying it's like, if you like Westworld, you might like Humans. It's like Westworld without the West.
It's similar to Westworld, so you'll enjoy it.
It's Westworld without the West.
Yes.
It's World.
It's World.
Then on Wednesday, June 6th, Condor returns to AT&T, their specific channel for them. And Impulse, one of the shows we talked about in our last section, debuts on YouTube Red, which I believe is now called YouTube Premium. Then on Thursday, June 7th, American Woman debuts on Paramount. Marvel's Cloak and Dagger premieres on Freeform, and Nashville returns to CMT. Then on Friday, June 8th, 2018, Sense8 concludes with a 2-hour movie on Netflix. So if you liked Sense8, but you didn't like the ending after it was canceled, well, here's a 2-hour movie to give you closure. And that's it for the week ahead. So thank you everybody for listening. As I mentioned, next week, Will's not going to be with us. He's not going to be with us for the next 2 weeks, actually, but we're going to continue discussion of Westworld with some special guest hosts. You can reach me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can reach Will. He is at Voxel Hero. You can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our site, thetotalscreen.com. If you can't access it through that address, we're having some issues with our DNS right now. You can check out thetotalscreen.blogspot.com, and that'll get you to the same source. You can subscribe to the podcast through any major podcast client like iTunes or Pocket Cast, and the entire backlog of our podcast, as well as additional video content, is available on our YouTube channel.
Sweet.
So,
all right.
Thank you everybody for listening. Good night.
Good night.
If you would like to reach out to us and make a comment, send an email to contact@thetotalscreen.com. Stay tuned to The Total Screen for the very best